I'm Dr. Lai Pak Hua, the principal and lecturer in Church History and Marketplace Theology in the Biblical Graduate School of Theology, or BGST.
In the Tao of Healing, you skillfully integrated Chinese healing and principles with Christian perspectives. What inspired you to explore this unique blend?
Well, I start off with the assumption that if God is the God of all creation, His word, His gospel should speak into every aspect of creation, not just Western culture, but also Chinese culture, including Chinese medicine. So that is my first premise. And on that basis, I therefore look around and see how do Christians evaluate Chinese medicine. And what I observe is that there are some quarters of the church that are okay with it, uses it regularly, but there are some quarters who are skeptical of it from a modern medical perspective. But there are also some quarters who say that, well, because it employs the metaphors of qi and yin-yang philosophy and so on, they feel that it is religious. They feel that it's been tainted by Taoist philosophy and you shouldn't use that. Now, that to me is actually problematic on a few fronts. Number one, we haven't fully done a very good job in evaluating the religious so-called Taoist background of Chinese medicine. Most of us who have done that in the past were tackling it from a biblical, theological perspective, but they don't attend to the philosophical underpinnings of the Chinese traditions. They have not engaged with the Chinese studies or sinological studies in this subject. Neither have they engaged with the role of linguistics in articulating medicine. These are areas I think that needs to be done. So if you don't deal with that properly, the net result may be we may be correct, and therefore, yes, we should avoid Chinese medicine, but it can also be that we can be wrong, and therefore we actually rejected Chinese medicine when it's not right to do so. It was actually a kind of neutral medical tradition. We rejected incorrectly. We basically have set things up for the Chinese to look at Christians and say, well, you are just rejecting my medical tradition because you are seeing things from Western perspective. So that will introduce apologetic challenges for us. It will make it harder for us to reach Chinese intellectual Christians when they think that Christians have rejected their medical tradition when they see there's nothing wrong with that. So that's the first point. The second point is that if we rejected Chinese medical tradition without sufficient evidence incorrectly, then we basically have cut out this whole pool of medical therapies that Christians can have access to, and Christians can actually be treated for. So that's the second reason. The third reason why I think we should reflect Christianly and theologically about Chinese medicine is basically the fact that Chinese medicine embodies Chinese philosophy, Chinese way of life, Chinese asceticism. And by reflecting on that, it provides fresh insights on how we can Christianize Chinese culture, how we can take on board Chinese culture to evolve a theology that is concurrently biblical and Christian, but yet at the same time also Chinese. So basically, the project is a contextualization project. So in short, three key points. The first is apologetics. We want to make sure that we represent Chinese medicine correctly so that we can better reach the intellectual Chinese. Number two is scope for therapy. If it's legitimate therapy, Christians should have access to that. And number three, contextual theology, meaning thinking about Chinese medicine provides us fresh ground to think about how to create a Chinese Christian theology that is faithful to Scripture.
Have you noticed any trends with regards to Christians and their perspective on TCM? For example, has the stigma against TCM become less significant, etc.?
Well, when you talk about people using TCM, it's about cultural preferences. And culture is one of those things that don't shift easily, right? So even in management practice, we talk about culture having strategy for breakfast. So stigma or preferences for TCM don't change overnight, don't change even over a few years. So in the Christian quarters, there are different perspectives. The more Chinese-speaking Christians tends to be okay with TCM. They tend to use it without seeing that it may contradict their faith. There are some quarters who are skeptical because they think that it may not fit the legitimacy set up by modern medicine, so they reject that for that basis. But the third quarter, as I've mentioned earlier, is that they see that TCM, because it employs the language of Yin Yang Wu Xing and also Qi, they feel that those philosophical categories are Taoist in nature, and therefore, by association, they must be negative, and therefore even demonic. So there are Christian quarters who basically even the use of acupuncture may lead to possession cases. I don't believe that these quarters have really changed their minds. It's very hard to change minds when it comes to cultural preferences. But I do think that it's important because the truth will set us free. Yep.
So can you provide an example of a Christian teaching or practice that has been particularly enriching for you through the lens of this philosophy?
Now in Chinese philosophy, there is a lot of emphasis about the yin-yang in the world. Now, when they say the yin-yang in the world, they're not dividing the world into something positive or negative. They are only saying that in all things in life, they are related in the creation realm. And so there is Chinese philosophy that say that 无极生太极，太极生两仪，两仪生思想，思想生八卦。Which basically is trying to say that 1 gives rise to 2, 2 gives rise to 3, 3 gives rise to 4, and so on. Now, why say that? When they are saying that Chinese philosophy is not trying to say pantheism, it's not saying to say that God himself doubled and become an extension of creation. Because why? Chinese philosophy don't think like the Greeks. They're not thinking on, to use a technical word, ontological terms. They're just talking about A causes B, causes C, causes D. And a great part of the misunderstanding of Chinese culture comes from reading Chinese culture through very Greek ontological perspectives. That's when a lot of Christian assessment of Chinese culture and medicine got it wrong. Now, just by understanding this has enriched my theological perspective into understanding how culture feeds and inform and shape how we see our faith, and how we therefore must be attentive to how culture can both empower our understanding of religion and also can give us some blind spots. So that is the general, what we call epistemological or philosophical input that studying another culture or like TCM provides for us. That's point one. The second point is that once we can see that Chinese culture or philosophy can open up new perspectives into an understanding of scripture, by implying that we were reading the scripture from a Greek perspective, then it begs into the question, are there ways in which we can see Chinese culture having coherence or resonating with biblical materials? And when you read Genesis 1, we tend to see the final point of creation story as God creating humanity and all is very good. We tend to downplay the fact that animals, creatures are all flourishing, they all have their rights. And when we do that, the human being become dominant. And what you end up having then is a kind of hierarchical understanding of creation. Human beings on top, and the only one above are the angels and God. Below are all the creatures. And everything else is dominated by the thing on top. But what you do get when you see things from a Chinese perspective is that it enables you to see everything in relationships rather than who is dominant over the other. There's no hierarchy. So when you see in terms of that, then you see in Genesis 1, the possibility that God intended creatures to be flourishing because God blessed them and asked them to be fruitful and multiply, so they have their right on their own. Human beings also. And so the so-called dominion of human beings over all creation is actually a kind of stewardship, a kind of taking care and ensuring that their rights are preserved. So when you put this all together, then what you're looking at is a kind of harmony between creation, creatures, and human beings. And in view of this harmony, God says it's very good. Now, this emphasis on relational harmony, that all is shalom within the relationship, really, for me, I can see it clearer because Yin-Yang philosophy emphasizes the need for creation to be harmonious with one another. And sin basically is this harmony, right? Some disruption has taken place, disobedience has taken place. So likewise, when you read Genesis 1, that God created male and female, and both are made in the image of God. Greek lenses will guide certain Christians to ask a question whether male is dominant or superior to female. That's Aristotelian thinking, actually. If you take an Yin-Yang perspective, it opens up the possibility, you need not need to accept that, but it opens up the possibility that in the relationship of the male and female, their oneness together as a relational pair reflects the glory of the image of God. That to me is consistent with the mystery of God's nature as Trinitarian. So understanding Chinese culture, in short, enables me to appreciate its notion of relational harmony that is undergirded by yin yang qi and wu xing. And this enables me to have new insights into possibilities that the scripture may be saying something else than what Greek ontology has misled us to see.